So good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Corey Wegner, the moderator for our conference today. And just as a reminder for our webcast followers, the title of our conference is Uniting to Save World Cultures, Investigating the Attributes of Successful Emergency Cultural Heritage Protection Interventions. We had a really lively first panel discussion on risk reduction, but now we'd like to shift over to have a panel discussion about the Haiti Cultural Recovery Project. And first of all, to kick us off, I'd like to introduce Susan Fruchter, Deputy Director of the National Museum of American History, to introduce Secretary of the Smithsonian, David Skorton.
I'm delighted to welcome you here to the National Museum of American History. The museum is a fitting place to hold a conference on protecting our global cultural heritage, since this museum is dedicated to conserving and sharing so much of America's cultural heritage with the world. The National Museum of American History is in the midst of a remarkable transformation. We are providing our more than 4 million annual visitors with dynamic new ways to connect with American history through our unparalleled collection of national treasures. We recently opened this past summer a new 45,000 square foot wing on this very floor dedicated to the very American ideas of innovation, invention, and business. And then our second floor of the West Wing will open in 2017 and will examine ideas of democracy, diversity, and the nation we build together. Our West Wing third floor will open in 2018, examining American identity through our culture, answering the question, what kind of culture is created by a democratic nation? All three floors are organized around the fundamental ideas and ideals of American history, a way to provide a coherent and compelling framework for engaging our visitors in our shared inclusive history. So over the next 2 days, please take some time during your breaks to tour our new wing and the rest of the museum, and through our culture, see all of our new exhibitions as we open them. It's now my privilege to introduce the 13th Secretary of the Smithsonian, Dr. David Skorton. The Smithsonian is fortunate to have Dr. Skorton as its leader. He's a board-certified cardiologist, a jazz musician who plays both flute and saxophone, and a proven visionary leader, most recently as president of Cornell University. Dr. Skorton has always led with a global perspective, developing partnerships with leading institutions around the world, and will examine how fit to lead the Smithsonian, which has been globally focused since our inception in order to achieve our mission dedicated to the increase and diffusion of knowledge. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Skorton.
Thank you, Sue. That was a really wonderful introduction, and I've been here 14 and a half weeks, so far so good. We'll know in about 5 years if all that confidence was worth it. I really appreciate that, and appreciate the job you do, Sue, as a deputy director of this wonderful museum. I ought to tell you, of all the opportunities I get for speaking engagements, which are many and wonderful, I've been looking forward to this one among the most of any of them, because it's a topic that's close to my heart, and one in which I'm learning more day by day. I'm learning a lot of it from my colleague and friend Richard Kurin, who's the Undersecretary for History, Art, and Culture at the Smithsonian. Beyond that title, he is an actual scholar and very experienced in this and many other areas. And I also want to give special thanks to the director of this fantastic museum, John Gray, and to Corey Wegner, who's our Cultural Heritage Preservation Officer. I also want to welcome the Honorable Lawrence G. Wohlers, U.S. Ambassador to the Central African Republic and a former State Department liaison to the Smithsonian. And I also want to thank the Smithsonian Consortia Office and the John and Carolyn Peterson Family Fund for making this symposium possible. And a warm welcome to all of you today, whether you've come from down the hall, across the mall somewhere, across the country, or the other side of the globe. Thank you for bringing your immense talent, experiences, skills, and passion to bear on saving cultural heritage. This is a vitally important task that, as you know, involves many challenges and controversies, but it should not carry the threat of a death sentence. When Syrian antiquities scholar Dr. Khaled al-Assad was murdered in cold blood by ISIS militants, it was to all of us a shocking act of terrorism. And when they destroyed important archaeological sites, including those in Dr. al-Assad's hometown of Palmyra, it was an affront to him, to his colleagues, and to his life's work. And it was also, as UNESCO Director General Irina Bokova noted, a new war crime and an immense loss for the Syrian people and for humanity. We all share in the outrage that his family, community, and country feel. Historic cultural sites and relics the world over are in jeopardy. The words of 20th century Czech historian Milan Hubel remind us why protecting cultural heritage is so vital. He said, "The first step in liquidating a people is to erase its memory, destroy its books, its culture, its history. Before long, the nation will forget what it is and what it was." At the Smithsonian, we serve as our nation's stewards of art, science, history, and culture. We look to our scholars and educators and collections to ensure that the American people never forget who we are or where we came from. This is an ongoing work that changes every day as each day adds to our personal histories and our national histories. And we work with partners to protect cultural artifacts literally around the world. Today's panel promises to provide many insights into the work that was done on our Haiti Cultural Recovery Project in the wake of the 2010 earthquake. Our esteemed panelists will share the lessons they individually learned and collectively learned from the experience. The discussion will hopefully lead to many ideas on how to apply those lessons in a systematic way to try and prepare for events like these in the future. While at Cornell University, I helped to oversee a response to the damage done by the Haiti earthquake to a medical clinic that was the world's first institution dedicated to treating patients with HIV and AIDS. And clearly natural disasters endanger people's safety and health and incomes and livelihoods. But they also, as you know so well, jeopardize the paintings and sculptures and books and artifacts and monuments that tell the rich stories of who each of us is. In addition to natural disasters, armed conflict, political instability, and sectarian violence, cultural heritage is, of course, threatened by global climate change. Take historic Jamestown, Virginia. Forensic anthropologist Doug Oehler and his team from the National Museum of Natural History recently helped identify 4 of the settlement's founders. They were buried in the 1608 church where Pocahontas married John Rolfe. Discoveries like this may be more difficult in the future, as the Union of Concerned Scientists has identified 30 national landmarks as threatened, severely threatened by climate change. Jamestown is one of them. Joining NASA's Kennedy Space Center, the nation's oldest city, St. Augustine, Florida, and the Statue of Liberty. Iconic places like this often make us think of cultural heritage to a greater extent in terms of its economic benefits, economic development and tourism and commerce. At least as important, cultural heritage brings to a society immeasurable intrinsic benefits that speak to our shared humanity. Cultural heritage gives insight both into where we've been and to who we have become. And in times of crisis, the cultural experiences that live in our art and architecture and artifacts can provide a powerful sense of belonging and a powerful sense of identity. That is critically important when the normalcy of daily life has been shattered by any of a variety of devastating events. As many individuals and institutions are doing, we are asking ourselves at the Smithsonian how to save the irreplaceable objects that connect us to culture and to history. Richard Kurin, as I mentioned, has been working very actively and very effectively on this for many years. And since Corey's arrival in 2012, we have taken our efforts really to the next level. With their leadership, Richard and Corey, we have been reaching out to many partners across the globe to work collectively to tackle these extremely important challenges. After April's earthquake in Nepal, the Smithsonian worked with the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property, or ICRM, in Rome, the International Council of Museums, and the International Council on Monuments and Sites. Together, our teams assessed the country's extensive cultural heritage damage and led workshops to help the Nepalese colleagues document and stabilize and eventually preserve the cultural heritage. In Mali, where jihadists destroyed sacred religious sites and manuscripts, collections, we worked with ICOM and UNESCO to convene museum directors from across West Africa to share response strategies and to provide training. In Egypt, we responded to bomb damage to the Islamic Museum in Cairo. In Iraq, we are training museum colleagues to restore and protect their own culture. And in Syria, we worked with the Penn Cultural Heritage Center to protect one of the Middle East's most important collections of Roman and Byzantine mosaics, even after a barrel bomb exploded outside the Ma'ara Museum in June. It was as successful as it was because we were able to support the museum's courageous staff and the museum's courageous volunteers. The world's great challenges, like these, will require more collaboration and more collective courage than ever before. That's why we work with partners such as the U.S. State Department, UNESCO, the International Council of Museums, the Penn Cultural Heritage Center, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, ICRM, the U.S. Committee of the Blue Shield, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Collaboration in this field is critical, which is why this symposium, I believe, is such a giant step forward. Too often, the protection and recovery of cultural heritage has been ad hoc and fragmented. Emergency responses to protect cultural heritage have been treated as temporary engagements for understandable reasons, rather than an ongoing discipline. The result, at times, has been that best practices and protocols and standards are frequently based on circumstantial evidence or conventional expert wisdom. By coming together for this symposium, you are establishing a new body of disaster management data informed by evidence-based analysis and detailed case studies. You are beginning to build capacity and in-depth interdisciplinary research, setting the stage, eventually, for better coordination and collaboration before the next disaster occurs. And perhaps most important, you're forming yet another worldwide network of cultural heritage specialists. I thank you on all of our behalfs for your willingness to act for cultural heritage protection in crisis. The work you will do in the next days really promises to be groundbreaking, and I congratulate you in advance. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Monuments Men, the men and women who protected and recovered thousands of priceless artistic and cultural works from the Nazis in World War II. Many of the world's great artworks would have been lost to history without their courage and expertise. At the Smithsonian, we're lucky to have someone following in that tradition, Corey Wegener. A retired major in the U.S. Army Reserve, Corey was the Arts, Monuments, and Archives Officer for the 352nd Civil Affairs Command in Baghdad. There she helped recover and preserve the collections of the Iraq National Museum after the 2003 U.S. invasion. She was the president and founder of the U.S. Committee of the Blue Shield, which, as you may know, supports the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. Corey first worked with us on the International Project Coordinator for the Smithsonian Haiti Cultural Recovery Project, and since she came on board full-time with us in 2012 as our Cultural Heritage Preservation Officer, Corey's talents in disaster risk reduction, armed conflict mitigation, and cultural recovery have really been on full display and great advantage. Please welcome our very own Monuments woman, Corey Wegener. gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Secretary Skorton. We're very happy to have you here with us this afternoon. Without further ado, I would like to start our panel discussion about the Haiti Cultural Recovery Project. I'd like to begin by introducing whom I consider the man who made it all happen, which is Dr. Richard Kurin, Undersecretary for History, Art, and Culture at the Smithsonian Institution. Since that time, in 2010, Dr. Kurin has led the Smithsonian's efforts in global outreach for cultural heritage disaster response and recovery. And it's because of his support and determination that the Smithsonian is working to support colleagues around the world in their efforts to preserve cultural heritage. Please welcome Dr. Richard Kurin.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, Secretary Skorton. Let's see, okay, I think I have that. So a number of people will be presenting about Haiti, and so I think this idea, the idea of this initial panel discussion is to put on the table, give you an introduction to what that project looked like. Just standing here and seeing people I haven't seen in a few years, Larry Wallers from the State Department who was involved, seeing my colleague Olsen from Haiti here, Stephanie Hornbeck, who just came back from Haiti 2 days ago, and many others who are involved. And so on Friday, I'll talk more about some of the issues of how we actually put that together, but the idea right now is just to give everybody a quick overview for those who are less familiar with it. So the earthquake in Haiti, January 2010, centered in the capital region of Port-au-Prince. Over 200, almost 300,000 people killed, 1 million injured, 2 million people homeless as a result of that earthquake. And the society was devastated. And if you remember, I mean, for those who didn't follow Haiti, we followed it on CNN. And what most impressed me about the aftermath of Haiti was what people relied upon to get through those first 2 days. The first 2 days, there was no USA, there was no Navy, there was no relief. It was Haitians out on the street, and people sang. People relied on the depth of their culture, of their resilience, of what made them who they are to survive without food, medicine, and shelter. I think it showed the world how powerful culture was. The damage to Haiti's physical culture was extensive. There's the National Cathedral in Port-au-Prince. This is what it looked like before. That's what it looked like after, as if it had been bombed. This was the Holy Trinity Cathedral, again before, 13 murals, larger than life size, scenes from the Bible in an Afro-Haitian way. This is what it looked like after. The Nader Gallery, about 20,000 works of art in that museum. That's what it looked like afterwards. The first response were Haitians themselves. People protected, people went in to obviously rescue survivors, their family, their neighbors. They cared for the sick. And right away, people went after books, documents, artwork, sculptures, Haitians themselves, before there was any even thought of an international cultural response. Very impressive. This is the music school behind the Episcopal Church. You see people, look at the tilt of that building. You see cars getting crushed on the side, and look what's coming out the window. People are going into a building, risking their lives to save musical instruments. Because that Haitian boys choir, the ensemble, meant so much to who they were. And immediately, Haitians did what they always do in the face of strife and disaster and trouble. They paint. They created. And people created song, people painted paintings, children painted their neighbors and families afflicted by the earthquake as a way of getting through that trauma. Now the Smithsonian had developed close ties with many Haitian cultural leaders because we'd done the Folklife Festival in 2004. We'd worked with a whole panoply of curators, cultural organizations, and so on. And so that's who we called upon. So Olsen, who you'll hear from in a minute, Olsen Julien, had been the coordinator for the Folklife Festival on the Mall for the Smithsonian. He had just been the Ministry of Culture in Haiti. We had people to talk to. And so tomorrow, on Friday, I'll get into the gory details of putting together something like this. But basically, with the help of the President's Committee for the arts and humanities, the endowments and so on, IMLS. We put something together. Now, I was not in this business. I'm a cultural anthropologist, most of my work in Pakistan and India. But to me, the two people that really put this together is we went to a meeting. Ford Bell called it at the American Association of Museums, as it was called then. It was State Department, Defense, Archives, all the cultural agencies were sitting around the table. And two people really struck me. Well, one thing struck me is the US had no plan. No government bill, no plan at all for how to deal with something like this, a cultural disaster at that kind of level. No money, no plan. Two people, I thought, really were inspirational. One was Errol Wentworth from the American Institute of Conservation. She stood up, in light of Katrina, we had trained all these conservators in disaster management. We had capacity. We had over 100 conservators, people who knew how to deal with a disaster situation. And I said, I could work with that lady. She knows what she's doing. And she calls upon this whole network of Americans who actually have knowledge to come to aid. The other person, of course, was Corey. I'd known about her work in Iraq. But she seemed to have her act together. And all of you know Corey. She does. Something about that military, a couple of military training with curatorship, and it's a good combination. And so, of course, then the key person was Rachel Goslings over at the President's Committee. And actually in this building, we had a great break with the First Lady of the United States. And I'll tell that story on Friday. But basically, after a few months, we were able to, about 2 months after the earthquake, we were able to put together enough agreements, legal agreements, MOUs, and so on, and even get the money to be able to mount a response. And so, this was the sign on the project that Olsen made in Port-au-Prince, and you could see everybody's logo in there, from Blue Shield and the American Institute of Conservation. Aparna's here from ICRAM, met with her boss, Bushnaki, in Paris. He said, we got to do something about this. They were on board. It was really an ad hoc effort. I mean, it was inventing this. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're here today, and for here this conference, so we don't have to invent these things all over and on the fly and on the spot. In any case, we ended up renting a UN building in Port-au-Prince, bringing in generators and equipment. The Smithsonian people can get into how to do a lease in Port-au-Prince during an earthquake disaster, and put together a Smithsonian staff, Olsen, and Stephanie Hornbeck, who you'll hear from in a minute. Stephanie had just retired as the conservator for our National Museum of African Art. She called me after the earthquake. Hugh Shockey had talked to her, key curator, person with a training through AIC in disaster management. Stephanie calls. She just retired a few weeks ago. She says, Richard, I hear you're doing something in Haiti. Can I help? I said, Stephanie, do I have a deal for you? And for 2 years, Stephanie worked in Haiti. So we put together a Haitian staff, put together Haitian cultural organizations to work on stuff. There's Aparna inspecting paintings that was saved. Gail Joyce from the National Museum of American Indian ended up being the registrar, working with our Haitian colleagues. And basically, we sent conservators down. And thanks to Eric Pouchot and Errol Wentworth, we had a slew of volunteers, both through the Smithsonian and through the AIC, to send down people. And I think we ended up sending about 70 people through the Smithsonian. And Errol, you guys sent, I don't know, about 50 people or something through AIC. And in the end, conservators treated about 35,000 objects. Paintings, sculptures, wall murals, and so on. A lot of training. There's Aparna in front of our group of different folks from different cultural organizations in Haiti. We ran, Rosemary, is that you up there? We ran training sessions. All the conservators came down. Haitians worked closely with them to learn the craft. At the same time, we were doing stuff in Haiti. The magazine, Smithsonian Magazine, was doing a special. Jeanette Cole did an exhibit over in African art on children's art. We did things with the Clinton Library, with galleries in New York to try to publicize what we were trying to do and give spirit to Haitians. We had Haitians at the Folklife Festival thinking about intangible cultural heritage. Diane Njai had gone with Corey and I on that first trip, and we arranged for Haitian craftsmen to get money. We basically gave them Smithsonian money and said, make stuff, and we'll sell it on the mall during the summer. And that got money into hands of artists who needed it at that time. And we had Haitian musical groups who ended up doing gigs on the mall, again, publicizing the earthquake, the needs, and so on. We had the Haitian boys choir from Holy Trinity here in this museum, and now we've had them several times. Big projects, the Center of Santa Art. In Haiti, we got UN troops, Japanese troops, to help dig stuff out with us, a lot of inventories, and a lot of collaborative work to save these collections. Some 5,000 artworks, I think, from the Santa Art. Another big project, those murals you saw at the beginning, saving these. At that time, Wayne Clough was secretary of the Smithsonian. It was great. Wayne was a civil engineer whose specialty was earthquakes. So he totally got into it, looking at the Haitian plans for scaffolding so stuff wouldn't fall down. And of course, saving those murals took a lot of conservation work, about 18 months, and now they're indeed preserved in 147 parts. And when that church goes up, they'll be reinstalled. And work at the libraries and archives and so on. In some cases, restoration of paintings. That top painting you can see from the palace. Some of the Haitian founding fathers from the National Museum. We ended up doing a Smithsonian Channel documentary, a book, many of the people here involved in the project participating in that, and came up with a phase 2 plan. So phase 1 lasted about 2 years. Phase 2 was we needed to build a permanent center because Haiti did not have a lot of trained folks and a lot of capacity, and there was still so much to do, independent of any disaster. We've been talking the first session about planning and so on. We needed to build capacity in Haiti, and Haitians recognized that. So the idea was to offer training to Haitian conservators, build a new plan. We've had Haitian conservators up at Yale. Stefan, who spoke earlier, has mentored with his staff these Haitian conservators getting advanced training. And just, I think 2 months ago, we dedicated this new center, Cultural Conservation Center at Quisqueya University. Ben Stiller gave us some money. The Haitians put in money. We put in money. And now there's permanent capacity, and that's where Stephanie was 3 days ago in that very building. So Haiti got us into not only trying to figure out how to do an intervention at a huge scale in Haiti, but also then, as the secretary pointed out, got us into business when Samuel Sidibe, the head of the National Museum of Mali, called the Smithsonian and said, help, we need help for what's happening here in Mali. And then in Egypt with the Islamic Museum, and then we joined with colleagues, and Lord described the network in New York to help save stuff, and folks from our MCI helped out in New York, and we sent supplies. And I hired Corey, and Corey does military training, and our, again, MCI colleagues train ICE agents to recognize problematic goods, and now we've joined with the AAAS, UPenn, and others in the Sochi project that you'll hear a lot of in Syria and Iraq. And Jesse Johnson, of course, has been working with the State Department over the last 5 years in Erbil in training Iraqis. And so the Smithsonian kind of got into this because at that first meeting, we went around the table and we said, what plans does the US government and NGOs and cultural agencies have for protecting what we all hold dear? And we didn't have any. So we've kind of grown into this space because we feel we have to, because we value it, and we value our colleagues and the people around the world who value their cultural treasures. And so, again, Aparna and Corey were in Nepal earlier, working with folks there to help save material. So we've done a lot of things. There's some US law pending that will have some impact with partnerships at the federal and NGO level. Takes a lot of MOUs and so on. And one of the things I think that we stressed in the earliest session that I see is really developing the kind of research base. The real research base, evaluation, research, and understanding, so we can approach this in a systematic, understandable way and get the kind of academic support from colleagues who really specialized in different world areas and understand what do we do that has impact and is effective and what isn't. So we really need to develop the data gathering, the analytic capacity with, I think, university partners. And then, as somebody said this morning or earlier today, I think it was Laura, one word, like money. Money is the fuel. No money, nothing works. So you need a lot of money. And we're aware of models like Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders and so on, and you kind of need some of the same things going on with regard to culture. Raising money so you can actually have effective interventions that actually can inspirit people and do the job that needs to be done. So one of the things I do, I have this like fantasy drawing, kind of out of, this is out of some, some Walt Disney, kind of thing, a little Photoshop here and there, and it's not just having a command center or something. I'm not like a big commando guy, but the idea that what's behind all of that, that if you're going to react to stuff, who are your troops in the field? Where are you getting your data? Who are your collaborators? What are the information sources? How can you really put something together to do a response in a kind of professional way? So I think that's what we're, at least what I'm envisioning. And what I'd like to do, I think now, is to hear from my colleague, because the person that really made it possible in Haiti was Olsen Julien, my friend and colleague. Olsen, you want to come up? Yeah, I think I need to close mine.
Yeah.
Is this it? Okay, F5.
F5.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight to talk about the Haiti project. First of all, I want to thank many of you who were in Haiti, spent time, and work with the Haitian colleagues to help saving Haiti's cultural heritage. I think Richard, I've talked about the context, but Corey asked me to talk about why did the Haiti Recovery Project succeed. And she wanted me to talk from an on-the-ground perspective. So what I was able to do, I was the manager of the Haiti project, and on the ground, and many things happened, and many people were here, so help make it happen. So, but the most important thing is the type of partners we have to put together to make the project happen, and the kind of value the partners shared to for the project to be a success. And in looking back at the value mobilized, we can see what worked on the ground and what did not work, and what kind of lesson we have learned about it. So in terms of partner, we have six types of partners: Haitian and U.S. government. So without the government involved, we were not able to do anything. And there's the Smithsonian institution, which had talked about the context, and we understand the important role the Smithsonian played for the Haiti project to happen. In fact, we like to call it Smithsonian Haiti project in Haiti. So, and that was the international institution and NGOs. We have the collection owners. Without the collection owners, we didn't have like collection artworks to work on. So, and we had training institutions and universities. So I'm gonna talk about those institutions and the media. So for the international institutions and NGOs, they provide human resources, institutional support, and knowledge base, technical and practical, to resolve technical and practical problems. Like an institution like Focal was the fiduciary agent for the project. So without Focal, we could not get money on the ground to do things. So UNESCO, MINUSTA, mobilized a lot of institutional support so the project could work. And the collection owners, it's a huge network of institutions who own collection, most of them private. So we had to work with public institutions, but the bulk of collection we worked on was private collections with Lehman Foundation, art galleries, and the central bank have a huge collection of things too. But we did work with public institutions, National Library, National Archive, and MUPANA. So the Cultural Recovery Center was like a bridge. Thank you. Like a bridge for the 6 type of partners so they can work together. Because it was very difficult to have like public agencies, private collectors, government, and NGOs working together toward the same goals. Like, it's a very difficult thing, and we have to try to bridge those people, and that was partly my job. At the beginning, we need to, those people needed to feel that they are part of the project. They have the ownership of the project. In the very sign of the project, we worked like 2 weeks, me and Richard, so everybody can see the project is there. So it's not a Smithsonian project, it's not a Haitian government project. It's an important project to save Haitian culture, that everybody is part of the project. So that was partly the core values that we shared with the partners. So when I talk about core values, I'm talking about fundamental belief and principles that guide behavior and action within an organization. So it's like, what value did we mobilize, what principle? The first principle was like a commitment to mutual respect. So mutual respect needed to lead to mutual understanding. Without that, there's no project. If every single person needs to be respected, so in the project, and we strive so respect be at the center of the project. Commitment to excellence, so we worked so we got the best people on the ground. So to do things, to work with people's collection, we're not gonna play with excellence. It's like for each project, we try to figure out the best way to manage the project, the best way to do things on the ground. Responsibility. Imagine we're working on people's collection and you come out and say, we lost some pieces. So it would be a disaster in the disaster. So it's like honesty and accountability. Every single piece needs to be there, and every single penny needs to be accounted for. So it's like when you're talking about the situation after the earthquake, it's a big challenge. So to deal with kind of responsibility. And then transparency. So we need to be open. Everybody can come to the center, like open door. We need to get them, provide access to the collection, and they can understand what we're doing. So the collection owners, the government, the people, the media, etc. And we need to communicate all the time. So communication, I would say robust communication was very important. So I had to talk on the radio, talk to school, talk at the university, get people to come on the ground, talk to them. So have the conservator to talk to like the head of institution. So talking, communicating, so people can understand that this is their project. You're not gonna understand this is your project if you don't have the information that you need to understand that. So based on those values, what worked on the ground, I think those values has been translated into firmness, creativity, and flexibility on the ground. You need to be very firm to be able to do things in a context like Haiti. Imagine that we have a visit of U.S. delegation, public event. We have premises with huge collection, and we have a lot of personnel working. So after the earthquake, with a lot of instability, with political problems, so you need to be very precise. And my principle is like, we don't play with security at all. So security thing is the key thing. So we did have like 100 of conservators coming down. So we did not have any problem with one conservator. Like, you need to talk to them and say, this place is safe, this one is not. So this is what you need to do. And when we have to do public event, we need to mobilize the police officers. Well, we need to hire some security people to do it. So security is a key thing, and it's a precise thing to deal with on the ground. The other thing is security and wellness for our colleagues. People who work with us need to feel safe doing that job. And it's like 30 of them working every day in that situation. Security of the premises and the artwork. So it's like the building is like at the center of PowerPoints, and the building needed to be safe and the artwork. But besides firmness and precision, we needed also flexibility, because we're working with different organizations, different organizational cultures. So that means people don't do things the same way that we would like to do it. And we needed to understand that and have them to manage a piece of the project the way they envision management, not the way I envision management. And what we did is to put together 9 special projects so they can have the ownership of that project, that piece of the project, and do it their way. And we work with them, find a way with conservators, with the government and everybody, find a specific way for each project. Like if we're working with the National Archive, it's not the same way we want to work with the National Library, not the same way with Lehman Collection or like another private collection. So it's like each project, it's an individual project, and each project has, each management is needs to reflect the culture, organizational culture of the institution who is doing it with us. So this way we've been able to save like more than 35,000 pieces with the institution. And in this picture we can see like that's board members for the Centre d'Art working with us with the center to prioritize like work, which one we need to save, which one we need to work on priority, and everything. So the other side of it is creativity. And that, I think that was the funniest thing is the project. That we wanted to find like how to buy conservation supplies. And some girl come up and say, at beauty supplies, you need cotton swab, you need acetone. So you can find that at beauty supply. And then one day I remember Richard asked me, Olsen, we have received coming from a beauty supply store. Oh, what did you buy there? And I said, acetone and cotton swab with other things to preserve beauty of the paintings. So it's like, that's the place to find it. And so at the center we said, when we saw that girls have started to do makeup, we knew that the project was possible. Because we could find everything if they can do it. So some things did not work, and we weren't able to make an agreement with the National Bureau of Ethnology. We got a huge collection of archaeological work that we did for the next 60 years, from the 1940 to like 70 years, 1940 to 2010. So it's a huge collection that we need to work on. Negotiation with ISPA about the construction of a conservation center on a public property field. So, and it was a painful process of negotiation. So, but we've learned from that. And management of transition from one government to another, that was very difficult. So I talk about like co-value. When you have a change in government, value change. It's not, government is something very dynamic. Every group come with their own value, their own team, and you need to try to adapt yourself to those values. And things are not very easy, and not all the time they worked out. So it's what we have learned is that it's very difficult to have like Haitian government to be proactive and take ownership of the project. So it's like you need to work, and if you find a minister of culture to say, you can do it, be happy. So, but because at some point they would say, you cannot do it. And you say, what you propose? Nothing. But you don't have the authorization to do it. That's it, point. So, and it is even more difficult to have a new government to take ownership of a project already started. So we've learned that. We've been working with like 7 Ministry of Cultures. since the beginning of the project, and each time is a long negotiation process. We've been very patient about it, but I think it was a good thing. And the conclusion, I think, we've been very communicatively rational. It's like we believe that communication is a key to resolve complex projects. And the Haiti recovery project was a complex, very complex project. So, like trying to base the communicative rationality on value was a key thing, because we could see who we need to work with. And we came up with a very nice network of people sharing those values, and they keep working with us. And with those people, we've been able to develop the second phase of the project on a university. And like we've found one tiny private university to put like $200,000 to help us build a new conservation center. So to be able to reach this, it's a big involvement of the society and the cultural sector. And I think that communicative rationality pays off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olsen. I'd like to invite the rest of the panel up to the stage, please. In addition to our two speakers. I'll stay right here, yeah. So for the remainder of the panel, I'd like to invite some of our other colleagues from the Smithsonian, and Stephanie, who was with the Smithsonian and then managed the project and now has her own conservation service in Miami, Florida, Caryatid Conservation. I'd like to invite each of them to say a few words for 5 or so minutes just about their experience and what we'd like to accomplish during the rest of their remarks and the rest of the panel discussion is to talk about how we think the Haiti Cultural Recovery Project can further inform the rest of our day and a half of discussions and the publication of the papers later on. And so I'd like to first of all invite Oehler, who is project manager and architect in the Office of Planning and Project Management, Office of Facility and Engineering Operations at the Smithsonian. Long title, Evie. So Evie was part of the original group after Richard, Diana, and Jai, myself, and Mike Bellamy, who used to be with OFIO here at the Smithsonian, went down to Haiti to figure out sort of some logistics of what we can do, look for a place to operate, look for some partners, look for some collaboration with the Haitian Ministry of Culture. And then we had a whole team of people come to see what we could further accomplish, and Evie helped us with that planning process. And so Evie, go ahead.
Is this on?
Go ahead, talk right into it.
Okay. So as Corey mentioned, I was part of a team that went to Haiti in May of 2010. And that was just 4 months after the earthquake. And our team was tasked with finding a facility to house the Cultural Recovery Project. There. So start all over again. Thank you. So just to recap, I went in May of 2010 with the team, and our goal was to find a place to house this Cultural Recovery Project, which sounds like a daunting task. We were somewhat of a technical team. I went with 3 engineers, an electrical engineer, mechanical, and life safety engineer, the associate director for our real estate, Ed Rinn, who's here today, and 2 conservators, and I think that was it. So I think there were 2 great points that we all learned that made this made it a successful mission. I think for from the beginning, we all knew that there was complete buy-in by the upper levels of the Smithsonian, and that was really key. We knew that Secretary Clough and Undersecretary Kurin were both very committed to the Smithsonian participating in the cultural recovery of Haiti. So that paired with very clear direction on what we had to do, even though it was somewhat daunting, to go down there and find a place and get a lease on it and do it in 2 months. So we arrived in Port-au-Prince, and our team was, I think, aghast at how bad things still looked. It looked as if the earthquake had hit recently. There was still rubble on the street. Many buildings had not had anything done to them, and the prospect of finding a workable building in the space seemed overwhelming. We did have a lead on one wonderful property, and that was the first one we looked at. And as soon as we went there, we thought, oh, it can't possibly get any better than this. This is going to be it. And I think adaptability and flexibility was part of what made it work. We looked at this office apartment building. You saw some pictures in the presentations. And even though they weren't built to be conservation labs and collection spaces, this one, oh, it's still not working. Yeah? Yep. Okay, can you hear me?
That's
Yeah,
better.
that's
Thanks.
sounding better.
Don't start.
I will. I know, it's 6
It's too
o'clock.
hard. It's too hard for you, though.
That's okay.
That's fine.
So we looked at the property, and there were just many great features about it. We could envision that the large parking lot around it could be used for unloading objects and early treatment and assessment. We could see that all of the different spaces could be used for individual treatment labs. The building was outside of town, which was a blessing. It was on a quiet street, had a tall fence, a tall wall around it, and secured entrances. So we knew it was the right space for what we needed. So all of the engineers and I, we did a quick assessment over the course of a few days, found many things that needed to be fixed. The most important thing was that the building had not suffered any earthquake damage, so we knew we could deal with any other part that needed to be fixed. We made a long list of requirements that became an addendum to the lease. We were very blessed to have a landlord who was motivated to have the Smithsonian as a tenant, so he really was very accommodating and really was able to do all sorts of things, buy the new generators, install all the life safety features, which were somewhat necessary since the building didn't meet US code and we were sending so many conservators down there. So really, the end result was a success. We were able to have a leased property by June, and that was when the first group of conservators arrived to start working in this space.
And so Evie will be followed by Stephanie Hornbeck, Director of Conservation at Caryatid Conservation Services and the manager of the entire Haiti Conservation Project at the Haiti Cultural Recovery Center in Port-au-Prince.
Thank you, Corey. Thanks for finding us a great building, Evie.
How much did it cost, Ed? I think it was like $38,000 a month, $40,000 a month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and $14,000 for fuel for
Yeah.
generators.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we had a really workable, adaptable building, and we're very grateful for that, so thank you. I've now made more than 30 trips to Haiti over 5 years, and it's been interesting to reflect on some of the challenges that I've experienced. And Corey asked me to focus on challenges, so I will. Our primary challenge was that we had to simultaneously create an infrastructure to enable our recovery work while actually undertaking the recovery. There was no foundation of trained personnel, no established conservation center, no stock of supplies and equipment already in place to draw on. So we had to establish this ourselves to even begin the work of recovery. And I'm going to talk more about developing infrastructure tomorrow in my paper. I wanted to mention two challenges that I encountered. One was as a manager, and one was just a personal challenge. The management challenge How to staff a cultural recovery effort with qualified personnel is an important consideration for any recovery mission. Our conservation staffing model depended on short deployments of 5 to 10 workdays of volunteer conservators. This was a time frame that their permanent jobs could accommodate. And 42 volunteers joined the project, contributing 400 work days. Am I okay? Okay. And this model was already in place when I joined the project, and I depended on the efforts of a volunteer coordinator. I had requirements that the volunteer conservators have a minimum of 5 years of professional experience and previous travel in a developing country, and French language skills were desirable. We learned that volunteer personality and attitude were as important as expertise. And the majority of volunteers were adaptable to project needs, glad to assist and hardworking. Yet managing short-term volunteers had challenging aspects for me because I had to devote a lot of my time to email correspondence and orienting a relay of volunteers for the project. And I believed that shifting the staffing emphasis from short-term volunteers to longer-term contractors would have been more efficient, though of course more expensive. I also wanted to say that we depended mainly on conservators for our project, but the inclusion of more collection managers would have been very helpful, as we sometimes managed large volumes of collection objects, and a greater diversification of collection care skills would have been very useful to us. My second point, which is sort of wanted to express some of my challenges on a personal level, which is that recovery work takes an incredible emotional toll on participants because of the surrounding devastation, chaos, and general unpredictability of circumstances. In response, our project followed strict security recommendations from the US Embassy in Haiti, which greatly limited our ability to move about with any freedom. We traveled to and from our lodging to the center with a project driver at all times, and we could not attend any public festivals in the city and certainly did not spontaneously go anywhere. So while we periodically had some planned meals and activities, the feeling of constraint could be oppressive at times. As our project had a long arc, we experienced hardship events in the country as well. We were present in Haiti during election crises, the cholera outbreak, and a severe tropical storm, and the center would be closed at times for the protection of staff. We were always very well protected, but these unstable times were unsettling for us. In thinking about participating in disaster recovery, one needs to really remember that this work will really push you to your capacities.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. And finally, we'd like to hear from Rosemary Fallon, a paper conservator at the National Portrait Gallery and the Lunder Conservation Center here at the Smithsonian Institution. Rosemary was one of our volunteers who came to work in Haiti on that volunteer cycle. We had volunteers from the American Institute for Conservation Collections Emergency Response Teams, but we also had many, many people who came from the Smithsonian conservation staff and other staff to volunteer. So I thought it would be good if we heard from the perspective of one of the volunteers and how Rosemary thinks that that can help us look at the rest of our conference in the future.
Stephanie Hornbeck, whom we knew from the Smithsonian, Emily Jacobson, my Freer Sackler colleague out there, asked the two of us to co-teach a workshop. Well, we were on the receiving end of that regular email communication because the focus of the workshop, we were sort of compounding, week by week, but that was fine, We had
You need to hold it closer to your mouth, Rosemary,
Closer?
because it
Okay.
picks up on your speech.
Okay.
There you go.
So Emily and I were charged with creating this workshop for the preservation and conservation of works of art on paper and photographs, identification of materials and processes, preservation in a tropical climate with particular focus on mold remediation, mold prevention, creating a disaster plan, and emergency preparedness, all in 3 days. There was a lot of emails back and forth. So we did the best we could. And another thing, I don't know that's actually been mentioned today, but all of the materials and supplies, some came from the beauty shop.
I thought it would be good if we...
However, the rest of them came in luggage with other conservators and maybe collections managers and others who preceded us and set up the labs. And by the time Emily and I arrived, everything had been set up. However, we did ask Stephanie for an inventory of the supplies because we needed to make sure we had, extra ones that were pertinent to our workshop. And we lugged a huge duffel full of supplies for the workshop to Haiti. So when we first got there, we surveyed the lab and got set up, and there was a quarantine room with objects that had molds. The mold had been climatized, and the mold was dried out, fortunately. And Emily and I chose from those works we did some documentation and processing and some sort of stabilizing treatments, but we also chose from those works to use in the workshop for the Haitian students. We had 12 students that were selected by, I imagine, Olsen and the staff and Stephanie. There were some chemists, artists, a couple employees from the National Library, a gallery owner. It was a good assortment of skills and knowledge, because sort of all of those people combined are, what the knowledge conservators have.
It'd be good if we...
And we had probably the most challenging part of it was the translation of conservation terminology with the translator, who was a lovely young man, but he didn't necessarily know what the words were. So we depended on our Haitian students that spoke English quite well. Some of them did, not all of them, to help with the translation. But it was interesting when something was translated incorrectly and almost nonsensically, they would all look so puzzled and say, we should be using, I forget, was it skim milk or something to, no.
Not skim milk.
So then there was the uncertainty of whether we could actually do the workshop, because we were there during the elections process, and every day we would have news of whether or not we could actually get to the center. Depended on who actually won the election that day, whether or not we could travel without encountering a demonstration. So that was a little, it required just flexibility. I think flexibility is a word that Olsen used, maybe in a different way. We had to be very flexible. I keep thinking of a lot of the C words that came up today that were all part of our experience, was the communication, the effective communication from Stephanie on what to expect, having the right supplies and tools, and knowing what we were going to teach, the communication from Richard's office, from LaShawn Burrell-Jones, who made all of our arrangements, the nurse in the health unit, who was fantastic here at the Smithsonian, who, gave us all our inoculations and medications and lots of great information. So we were really well prepared, and I think it was the infrastructure that you were constantly creating we benefited from. And AIC, we worked with Eric to order all the supplies that we lugged on the plane. And everything seemed to work very smoothly, at least from my perspective. And then there was that, collaboration, the partnerships, the communication, the cultural sensitivity. I think that was important for us to not overstep our bounds, and we trusted Stephanie's judgment, working with Olsen and the staff at the center to, to make sure that we were sensitive to what we were doing and whom we were working with the Haitian students. And creativity, that was another word that Olsen used, and it's one that we realized that we didn't have everything we needed, or maybe we could fabricate something that we could use as a teaching tool. And we also encouraged our Haitian students to think practically, in a practical way. You can't get the supplies, the storage supplies, the folders, the proper storage containers, but you're the artist. You have art supplies, you have art stores. You can get maybe some good quality papers to use as enclosures, and be creative and in a practical way. So that was really important.
Thanks, Rosemary. I think that's really a good overview from all of you. I'd like to just say that I could have had dozens of people up here on this stage. It was really, really hard to settle on this small group because there are so many people in the audience and who are all around the country and even the world who helped on this project. Just a few people that I was so pleased to see could come. Hitoshi Kimura, one of the AIC CERT conservators, paintings conservator, who's, along with Hugh Shockey, who's no longer with us at the Smithsonian. He's now at the St. Louis Museum of Art, but I hope you're watching, Hugh Shockey, on the webcast. And we were one of that initial group that had a ton of supplies that we unpacked in Stephanie Hornbeck's apartment in Miami and packed into duffel bags, and then begged the airlines to let us bring massive quantities of excess baggage. And when they said no, we said, but we're from the Smithsonian. And they said, okay, that sounds good. Sure. So there's, if I mention everybody, I'll leave somebody out because there's so many people in the audience, but Gail Joyce came to teach registration. Sarah Stouderman came multiple times to teach, okay, maybe once. She held up her finger. And even though Jessie Johnson wasn't part of the Haiti project, she was already running the Iraqi Institute in Erbil. And I actually called her and said, yeah, that whole center thing, how did you do that? Can you kind of explain some of your methodologies that we might be able to apply just in like working with the government? And she had some really, really good suggestions for us. And it's all come, full circle around now. So I want to open it up to those of you who are in the, and I also wanted to point out Bill Tompkins, who was at that initial meeting with Richard Kurin at AAM back in 2010, and was so kind to me after the meeting when I was so frustrated about, that we didn't have a plan yet. At any rate, so many people helped, but I want to open up the floor for anybody who helped with the project to make a comment or for any questions. Hitoshi.
Who preserved who treated the first painting, right?
Thank you.
Yeah,
very first.
Recognize me.
yeah.
Well, I have so many stories to tell you, but I know time is limited. But as Corinne explained, when we got all the package, we brought the extra check-in bags all together and stopped by Stephanie's apartment to put all the supply together to ship, take with us to go to Haiti. But I think there used to be, we are allowed to check in 2 baggage, but just the day we check in, they just change the regulation because so many people bring in the extra bag to the Haiti. So they changed the regulation, but Corinne was great. She's such a negotiator. She
Persuasion.
Yeah, she did a great job negotiating. And when we were in Haiti, the Olsen was great. He was always cool as a cucumber. I mean, he was in the Haiti, but he never panicked or anything. And that's very important because I have been to many disaster situations in the local in the United States, but people get so stressed out and panic. But he was a great leader, just so cool. And first thing what we needed is there's a lack of supplies. We brought a lot of supply, but like alcohol, we can put in the bag. So I asked Olsen, can you find me alcohol because I'm using conservation paint. I need alcohol to dilute the paint. But he said, see what I can do. And next morning it's there. But it was such a strong alcohol. And me and Hugh was looking at it, opened the bottle, and aroma was kind of
Did you mix it
kind of
with
strong.
with tonic?
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought, we thought like that must be came from rum factory. We kind of open for a while, we enjoy smelling. But just the things, any disaster situation, people have so much stress. But, not only coordinate things, but important things as a leader, make people calm down. That's Olsen was great about that. And I just wanted to tell you, kind of behind the story.
Thanks, Hitoshi, appreciate
And
it.
one other things.
One other thing.
Yeah, one other thing is, I know beginning, Mr. Kurin, he had an option of secure the place, yourself, like a military base or somewhere, and build, bring a portable unit or something. But do you still have the option to, if some other event happen, because that cut a lot of cost. But if military base or station, its security is great. So I was always wondering about if some other incident happened in the other country, it could be an option. Because now I see a lot of container cargo. They convert to the studio and things like that, and people using a second house or mother-in-law, and cost getting lower and lower. So I was wondering, you might be thinking about start to try if a movable container lab could be available, because it costs probably only $30,000, $25,000, $30,000 to make one, a studio by container, shipping container. I thought that it's a movable. You can ship anywhere, overseas or even domestic. So I thought that could be a good option.
Yeah, when we first went down, when Diane and Jai, I think I'm on the Lavalier, right? Yeah, you have. So when we first went down that first trip, about 6 weeks after the earthquake, Diane and Jai, Corey, Greg Borstead from the State Department, Sheila Mannion was great at the embassy. But we met actually with the military, General Ken Keane, who is the commander of U.S. troops there. And when we first, the U.S. headquarters was right next to the U.S. Embassy. And we looked around and we saw his tents, computers, porta-johns, generators. We said, this is what we need. And he actually promised us that we could get the military stuff that the Department of Defense had brought in. And we said that was good, because we hadn't thought of a building. We weren't sure we could locate one that hadn't been affected by the earthquake. It turned out U.S. troops deployed longer in Haiti. They were there. We had looked at land for that. We wanted a place that was close to the airport because the airport was more secure. And there was land, but that didn't work out. There was a European project through the French Blue Shield. They had this idea of the Ark. And the idea was it was kind of this componential thing. You would build something in Europe. There would be componential, studios, equipment, and so on. And you'd put it on a ship and send it to Haiti, and then open it up, and you'd have an encampment, and you'd have a conservation center. Kind of you think of a field hospital, for example, something like that. So I learned in this that conservators are like surgeons. And that, conservators are very, have a heart, the artwork is their patient. And the stuff, and you want the best conditions because you want to do the best job you can. And, when you're working in an emergency situation, it's like a field hospital. It's not quite ideal, as I think, Stephanie and Rosemary have said. The Ark turned out impossible. It was impractical. I think they got a grant from Prince Claus Foundation for $250,000, which is nothing. And it took them 3 years to actually stage something in Haiti. And it was well after the fact. It was too little, I think too late in a way. So I don't think we've quite perfected the methodologies. What you raise is a good question. How do you respond quickly? How can you get people in the field? How can you get people in the field? I was always mindful after the meeting, when we had that meeting in February here, that Corey had called Ford Bell at the American Association of Museums. It was snowing here. The snow was falling that day, and I was thinking, oh, it's going to rain in Haiti, and all these materials that you saw pictures of Stephanie and others pulling stuff out of the Santa Art. If we had a lot of rain, if we couldn't make it when we did and get in the field pretty quickly, we would have lost hundreds and hundreds of works to the rain. And so you're kind of thinking, how do we get in the field fast? What's the kind of methodology? What do you need? How best to do it? You got to think of shipping and customs and logistics. Larry Wallers, we were very fortunate. Larry was at the State Department. He was the first State Department liaison to the Smithsonian. And Larry was like my institutional governmental psychotherapist. Like, how do we do this? And how can we get government support? And how can we deal with the Haitian government? How can we make this happen? And so you have to think, in Haiti, just getting things in. Hitoshi, as you suggest, if you try to ship things in, you can get delays because the port at Port-au-Prince was wrecked. There was a backlog of trucking in stuff from the Dominican Republic. So when you're doing something like this, it really makes you think of how to do it. And again, we were doing this, as you've heard. I mean, there's no pretense here. It's not like we had a full-blown plan and like we could read a manual. I mean, we were doing this as it was going. Let's try this. Okay, that's not working. Let's try this. Let's try this. Now I think we have a body of some experience, and others do, Jesse and Erbil and others of you in other projects, where you need to start putting this together and trying to figure out, okay, how do you do this in an effective way?
I just spied Vicki Lee in the audience, which was also one of our volunteers. How many times did you go to Haiti, Vicki? 3 times. Do you have any comments to add to what was already said? No.
Yeah, Aparna.
And Aparna came. Oh, I can't see you because you're behind. Yes, Aparna. I'm not tall enough.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out it was an amazing project, and I think for me, as an outsider, as an organization that only came there for this 3-week training course, what was very important was to see that you had people on the ground, because in complex situations such as Haiti, you cannot pull strings from remote control and not have your boots on the ground, so to speak. So I think that was a very crucial element in this project that worked, and other initiatives didn't work because they didn't have this kind of entrenched, like Olsen and Stephanie having an office there. But my own experience was like this amazing, way we worked with the military. I remember still that I was on the plane. I had this very vague idea that for our salvage operation, we will need heavy machinery, and we will need to go to some place, somebody. And then I met a colleague, Elke Selter from UNESCO, who told me, well, it is possible. You are an IGO. I am an IGO. We could go to this log base, which was this place where all the MINISTA was. And we had to go there for 6 o'clock meeting. We dressed up, I remember. And we were very nervous because we thought like it's going to be a big negotiation where we are going to ask for military's help. And I was like all pumped up to say, why is it important for them to come and help us? But there was I think a US Army officer, a lady who was in charge of that coordination meeting, because they used to have these, and that's where I got this idea that we should be part of clusters. Because she said, you're more interested in transporting sand. Yes, we will come. I was like, oh, that's it. And I thought, meeting over. And so I think what you've been saying is about transporting and getting supplies. And they had anti-snake, serum, because we were not prepared. We went there in the morning, all like thinking we are big heroes, and we didn't have something to protect us from scorpions or snakes that could have come out. they had the vehicles, they had the first thing they asked me, coordinates. I was like, coordinates? What coordinates? Like, things like that. So that makes you think that this is where we are very unprepared and we need to work a little bit more on that.
Sarah?
I wanted to speak a little bit about a personal experience as well, because I think as we go forward in the next 2 days, we'll want to add a couple more C words. I think curiosity is one of them, and courage. But I really was personally moved in Haiti to be working with people. I had a transformative experience just working with the people from Haiti who I got to see in their own environments, because one of my jobs was to go and work in the studios, to meet with people in the television and radio studios to see what their collections were and to talk to them. And I met people who had tremendous dedication, had real passion for their work, who were colleagues in every respect. And to me, that was so terrific. It was so important for me to be part of that. And that was my experience. And it wasn't so much about, helping somebody else. It was about my own ability to be moved and to be part of something that's important. So then the question is, who's going to do this work in the future? And you need to go in with courage, and you need to go in with curiosity, and to recognize, of course, the humanity in all of us, but to recognize the professional and discipline in the approach that people have. And that was such a privilege for me to have those opportunities. I think I was most of the time people were in the conservation center, and they were coming to the conservation center, and I was able to go out to these special locations and to meet with people who were sort of underserved, but who also taught me a lot about how they persevered and how they managed in a place where they didn't even recognize that that they had collections. I would never have thought of it as collections. They were like, well, these are the records we play. Well, they may be the only pressings of a Haitian artist from the 1950s, or these may be the only videotapes of dignitaries coming to Haiti. And this is important, and it's valuable for us to come and to recognize the importance of those things, but it also was important for me. So there's both of those things.
Can I just comment on that?
Yeah, sure.
Because at the beginning when we were talking, and we thought of, and for a very short time, there was a suggestion made, like if we were going to go into this project, basically let's gather up stuff in Haiti, send it to Florida, and do something in Florida. And I think, we rejected that on good grounds. One, we had, very competent, strong colleagues in Haiti who regard this as their stuff. And it's that buy-in. The people, again, that were first on the scene, a good colleague of mine in Olsen, who also participated in the photo, Patrick Villar, he was out right away, like within days of the earthquake. I mean, getting tarps over stuff and putting up scaffolding and jury. I mean, the front line in that effort were Haitians. And so you can't cut out the people who are in the front lines who it really means so much to. And it's going to have that payoff later. It's like we heard this in early session. There's a context for this. This isn't just like stuff. This is things that people identify with. It's meaningful. And so I think we've learned that, when I think about the work that, Jesse and other people do, and Catherine Hansen and others in Erbil. I mean, you can say, okay, in Syria and Iraq and other places, get the stuff out of country, so ISIS won't blow it up, and just protect it and save it. But people are indeed risking a lot and putting a lot to save it at those front lines. And I think one of my lessons in all this is the more you can do in terms of buttressing, obviously preparation ahead of time and arrangements, but you cannot desert those folks who are in the front line in terms of whose cultural heritage, they've dedicated their
I
lives
think
to.
one of the lessons is how to work so people can feel that they do the project with us. It's like, it's not our project, or it's not the Smithsonian project, it's like a people's project. Because like artworks or culture is a way people used to be what they are. So it's like when after an earthquake, when you work with them, so they do something about the collection. I used to say them the reason for living, and they feel better, not just about the art, but what they are as a society. And that, for me, that was the importance of the project. Beyond the artifacts, the people who own or who value the artifact was important for us. Like stack, and when we start to do that, we start to recreate a community that got a sense of hope. So we create hope. Like when I talked to Kiskeya University and the president of the university and said, it's a very important thing that we keep on doing that project. So there's no other way to teach Haitian that we can get over that difficult situation. So if we can have a project about culture that is a success, so we can take that project as an example that we can go over the hardship that we're living as a people. So it's like it was that kind of project is very important for the group, the social group, but for an institution like a university. It's like when we build the conservation center at the university, it's like all the university understood that we can rebuild the university if we work on projects that mean something for the collectivity.
And I'm afraid, as the timekeeper, I'm going to have to stop it on that note. Thank you so much to the panel